My family forgot I existed for 9 years. Then, at Christmas dinner, I mentioned completely by accident that I had just turned down a $340 million acquisition offer. My brother's wine glass slipped out of his hand. My mother's face went the color of typing paper. And my father, the man who once told me to aim a little lower, sweetheart, set down his fork and stared at the tablecloth for what felt like a full minute. I want to tell you that story. All of it. Because I think a lot of you already know what it feels like to be the one nobody's betting on. I learned how to disappear when I was 8 years old. That was the summer my brother Daniel turned 22 and graduated from Duke. Full tuition paid by my parents. Ceremony attended by the entire extended family, followed by a catered dinner at the nicest restaurant in our suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. My parents bought him a brand new Ford F-150, silver, with a big red bow on the hood. I watched from the kitchen window, still in my pajamas because no one had remembered to wake me up in time to get dressed. Daniel was the firstborn, the golden child. He arrived when my parents were young and hungry and full of hope, and they poured everything they had into sculpting him into something they could be proud of. Private school from kindergarten through 12th grade Ashford Academy, $17,000 a year. Football camps in the summer. SAT tutors. A college counselor who charged $300 an hour. I arrived 6 years after Daniel, and I have always suspected I was less of a plan and more of a surprise. The nursery was painted half-heartedly. My baby book contains exactly 4 photographs and stops abruptly at my first birthday. By the time I was old enough to notice, Daniel was already the main character of our family's story, and I was a footnote. He went to Duke on my parents' dollar. I went to NC State on a full academic merit scholarship, every single cent of it earned by me. And my parents' reaction was a brief nod at breakfast, and a question about whether I'd remembered to forward my mail. There was no party. I want to be clear about something, because people always ask. I was not bitter back then. Not exactly. I was confused. I had absorbed the message so completely that I had started to believe it. Daniel was exceptional. I was fine. Some people were worth investing in. Some weren't. I held that belief until it became load-bearing. Until it was a wall I was pressing my whole life against without realizing it. But something else grew up alongside that belief. Something my parents never intended to plant. Hunger. While Daniel was getting SAT tutors, I was sneaking into the school library before first bell to read everything I could find about computers. About how systems worked. About the language machines spoke. While he spent his summers water skiing at Lake Norman on my parents' boat, I was working the register at a hardware store and saving every paycheck in a notebook where I tracked every dollar earned, every dollar spent. While he was deciding between Duke and Wake Forest, I was applying for every scholarship I could find, writing 47 personal essays in 3 months, and quietly, privately, learning to code. The first real crack happened the December I was 20 years old. I was home from NC State for winter break, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, finishing a freelance project, a small inventory dashboard I had built for a local hardware distributor. They paid me $2,800 for it, which was the most money I had ever received for anything in my life. I was stunned. I had been paid to think. Over dinner that night, I tried to tell my parents. I had just gotten paid nearly $3,000 for a software project I built in 3 weeks. My father looked up from his plate. "Is that stable income, though?" my mother said. "Daniel's firm just landed a huge new client. Did he tell you?" That was the last time I tried. What I built instead, quietly, while no one was watching, was a company. It started with that hardware distributor's problem. Their inventory system was a disaster of spreadsheets and guesswork. I built them something better. A lightweight, real-time tracking platform that connected their suppliers, their warehouse, and their retail floor into one clean dashboard. They were so stunned by the results that they told their supplier told their distributor. By the time I was 21, I had 9 clients and a product that was genuinely solving a problem that mattered. I called it Flowcore, a supply chain intelligence platform. I worked on it from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. every night. After my campus job and my classes, I lived on dining hall, food, and black coffee. I had $387 in my checking account for most of my junior year. But every week, Flowcore got a little better, a little smarter, a little harder to compete with. At 22, I graduated with honors. I had 61 clients and $340,000 in annual recurring revenue. Nobody in my family knew. Nobody had asked. The years between 22 and 28 are hard to summarize because so much happened so fast. At 23, I hired my first 2 employees, brilliant engineers I had met through online forums. At 24, a mid-size logistics chain in Ohio signed a $180,000 contract. At 25, I had 31 employees and $4.2 million in annual revenue. A venture capital firm in Raleigh offered me $9 million for 25% of the company. I took the meeting, turned down their terms, and negotiated a counter. $11 million for 18%. My lawyer nearly fell off his chair, but I had read the numbers. I knew what Flowcore was worth. I had spent years being told to aim lower. I was not doing it with my own company. At 26, a national retail chain came aboard. Then a second. Then a regional pharmaceutical distributor, whose contract alone was worth more than my parents' house. At 27, we went international Canada first, then Germany, then Singapore. Revenue hit $22 million. I moved out of my one-bedroom apartment in Raleigh and into a slightly larger one. I bought a used Tesla. I kept my head down. My parents still thought I was doing computer work. My mother occasionally asked if I was meeting people and whether I was eating enough vegetables. My father once forwarded me a job listing for a mid-level IT position at an insurance company in Charlotte. I saved that email. I still have it. The acquisition conversation started when I was 27. The first offer came from a large logistics conglomerate out of Atlanta. $210 million. It was a number that made the room tilt slightly when I first heard it. But they wanted to dissolve Flowcore's team, absorb the technology, and phase out the brand within 18 months. I said no before they finished the sentence. The second offer came from a European infrastructure firm. $290 million. They wanted to relocate the entire operation to Amsterdam and restructure the leadership team. I said no within 48 hours. My board thought I was losing my mind. These are generational wealth numbers, one of my early investors told me, genuinely frustrated. You are walking away from life-changing money. Not the right life, I told him. The right offer came from a woman named Patricia Holden, the founder and CEO of Nexarian Group, a mid-sized supply chain technology holding company based in Atlanta. She had built her own company from a basement in Memphis. She understood what it meant to have created something from nothing. We met for coffee on a Tuesday morning in October. She spent 40 minutes asking about my team before she asked about my revenue. I don't want to dismantle Flowcore, she told me. I want to give it the infrastructure to become what it was always supposed to be. You stay as CEO. Your people stay. Your vision stays. We give you the runway. The negotiation took 4 months. My legal team and her legal team argued over 72 separate provisions. I fought hardest for my employees' guaranteed retention packages, equity grants, a seat at the table for my senior leadership. Patricia didn't flinch at a single request. When we finally agreed on terms, she looked across the conference table and said, "You fight like someone who's been underestimated their whole life." I said, "You have no idea." The final acquisition price was $340 million. After taxes, legal fees, and the bonuses I distributed to my team, I personally cleared $172 million. I was 28 years old. I kept a Tesla. I kept my apartment. I told approximately 6 people. My parents had no idea. Daniel had no idea. I flew home to Charlotte for Christmas that year, the first time in 4 years I had made the trip, partly out of curiosity and partly because my therapist had asked me a question I could not stop thinking about. "What are you afraid you'll feel when you're in that house?" she had asked. I had sat with that for a long time. "Nothing," I finally said. "I'm afraid I'll feel nothing. That it won't matter. That they won't matter. And I'll realize I spent 20 years trying to earn something from people who were never going to give it. And if that's true," she said, "is that grief? Or is that freedom?" I drove to Charlotte with the windows down and the heat on, which is a very specific kind of November comfort. I had the acquisition paperwork in my bag, not as ammunition, not as proof, just as a reminder. Talisman. The house looked exactly the same. My mother met me at the door with a hug that smelled like pine candles, same as always. Daniel was in the living room with his wife, Kristen, and their 2 kids. Daniel had done well for himself, regional sales director at a medical device company. Nice house in a suburb of Charlotte. 2 healthy kids. I was genuinely happy for him. He had also been handed more than I had been. But I had stopped being angry about that somewhere over the Appalachians on the drive up. My father shook my hand at the door. "There she is. Still saving the world with computers?" "Working on it," I said. Dinner was loud and warm in the way large family Christmases are, warm surface temperature. A kind of pleasantness maintained by mutual agreement not to go too deep. My mother had made a brisket. There were 3 kinds of pie. My niece and nephew were 4 and 6, and completely unaware that any subtext existed beneath the tablecloth. It was actually going fine. I was not going to say anything. I had not planned to say anything. Then Daniel, in the generous and completely casual way of a man who has never once considered that his sister might have her own story worth asking about, said, "So what is it you're doing again, exactly? Like, what does your software actually do?" He was not being unkind. He was genuinely asking. Possibly for the first time. I looked at him. Then at my parents. My father was still cutting his brisket. My mother was refilling my niece's milk. And something just loosened. Flowcore manages supply chain logistics, I said. Real-time inventory tracking. Supplier integration. Predictive analytics. We operate in 11 countries. I just sold the company. My father looked up. Oh. To who? Nixarian Group. Out of Atlanta. That's good. Good for them to have someone with your experience. What kind of salary did they offer you, Dad? I set down my fork. I sold my company. I was the founder. I built it. I owned it. I sold it. Silence. My mother put down the milk. What do you mean you sold it? I mean I spent 8 years building a software company from scratch, and in October I sold it for $340 million. After everything, I cleared $172 million. My niece asked if she could have more pie. Nobody answered her. Daniel's wife, Kristen, was the first to speak. She said quietly, "Oh my God." My brother's face did something complicated. My mother's face went completely still, and my father set down his knife and fork with a small, precise click, and looked at his plate, and did not look up for a long time. "Why didn't you tell us?" My mother finally said. Her voice was not angry. It was something worse. It was bewildered, and I thought about that question for a moment. "I tried," I said. "When I was 20. You asked how Daniel's new client was doing. That's not fair. I tried when I was 22. I tried when I first got venture capital funding. I stopped trying because it was clear that what I was doing was not interesting to you. Daniel's career was interesting to you. My career was something I did in the meantime." Daniel said, "That's not," and then stopped. He ran his hand through his hair. "I mean, I didn't know what you were doing. You never talked about it." I stopped talking about it because no one listened. Another silence. Longer. My father still had not looked up. I want to say we had a breakthrough. That my mother wept and held me, and told me she was sorry. That my father looked me in the eye and said the words I had spent 20 years, not realizing I was waiting for. That did not happen. Not that night. What happened was that we finished dinner in a strange, stunned quiet. My niece got her pie. Daniel kept looking at me like I was a person he was meeting for the first time. Which I suppose was accurate. Kristen hugged me in the kitchen while we were washing dishes and whispered, "I always knew you were doing something. I'm so proud of you." That mattered more than she knew. My father came to find me later that evening. I was sitting on the back porch in the cold with a glass of wine, watching the neighbors' Christmas lights blink. He sat down in the chair next to me. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't. I should have asked." I did not argue with that. "I'm proud of you," he said. He said it the way a person says something they know is insufficient and true at the same time. I should have said it a lot sooner. I should have paid more attention. I don't have a good excuse. I looked at the blinking lights for a while. "I know," I said. We sat out there in the cold for another 20 minutes, not saying much. It was not a resolution. It was not forgiveness. But it was a beginning of something. And I was old enough and tired enough to accept a beginning. 3 months after Christmas, I launched my second company. It is called Meridian AI. And it does for pharmaceutical supply chains what Flowcore did for retail and logistics. Predictive intelligence. Real-time visibility. End-to-end traceability. I brought 12 of my best people from the Flowcore era. We are already in conversations with 3 of the largest hospital systems in the country. I am not building it in silence this time. I give talks. I mentor young women in STEM. Last spring, I was invited to speak at NC State, my own alma mater, and I stood at the front of an auditorium full of first-generation college students and told them the truth, that I had spent years believing I was not worth investing in, and that belief had been wrong, and that building something of your own is one of the most effective ways to prove it to yourself, not to anyone else. A young woman came up to me afterward. She was a junior, computer science, here on a scholarship. Her family back in rural Tennessee, skeptical of what she was spending her time on. "Do they ever come around?" she asked. "Your family. Did they ever actually see you?" I thought about my father on that cold porch. About the Christmas lights blinking in the dark. "Some of them are trying," I said. "That's more than I expected." She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. My mother calls now on the first Sunday of every month. She asks about Meridian AI and writes down things I tell her in a little notebook. She showed me a page of it once over video chat, and I had to look away for a second because my name was at the top of it in her handwriting, underlined. Daniel texts me occasionally. Last month he sent me an article about a supply chain startup that reminded him of Flowcore, with a note that just said, "I tell everyone my sister built one of these. I brag about you now. Figured you should know." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Thank you. That means something. People ask me all the time what the $172 million feels like. Here is the honest answer. It feels like evidence. It is proof, stored in a number, that the years of doubt and dismissal, and being the one who nobody was betting on did not determine the outcome. It is a very large receipt for a very long argument I was having with myself. The money is not the point. The money is just the part people can understand quickly. The point is the woman who learned to code in a library because no one was buying her a tutor. The point is the 20-year-old who set an alarm for 11 p.m. every night to work on something she believed in when everyone around her was asleep. The point is that being underestimated, as painful as it is, can become the quietest and most relentless kind of fuel, if you choose to burn it forward instead of letting it burn you down. I chose to burn it forward. I am still choosing it. And if you are reading this, if you are the one in your family who does not have a stocking hung by the fireplace, who does not get the party, who is met with polite nodding when you talk about your work, I want you to hear this clearly. Their ceiling is not your ceiling. Build the thing anyway. About the author. This is a work of creative nonfiction. Names and certain identifying details have been changed.